sort of setting the table for us this morning around this whole idea that Trump now finds that, oh, I'd really, really like to debate, but, it's just too late. It's just too late. People are already voting. Now, the subtext to that, you and I know, is I'm scared as hell. This woman whipped my behind the last time. I don't want no more smackdown like that. I'm a chicken. So that's what's really going on here. But the bigger picture for me is beyond the debate. It is about the state of the party, which is what you get into in your new book, Reagan. This idea of Reaganism leading to Trumpism. You note in an excerpt from the book, his life and legend. By 2016, Reagan's party had left his seemingly genteel brand of politics behind for the harder-edged populism of Donald J. Trump. Many analysts wondered if Trump represented a repudiation of Reagan's legacy or a continuation of it. The truth, with questions of Reagan's intelligence was complicated, there were many obvious differences between Trump and Reagan, both in their policies and their styles. Reagan was pro-immigration, pro-free trade, pro-democracy, and pro-NATO. But the reality of it is we are none of those things today as Republicans. How does that backdrop really inform us about what's playing out right now on the national stage?
Well, thanks for having me on, Michael. And it's certainly chastening to think about how the Republican Party has changed since Reagan's heyday, as the quote that you put on from the book indicates. And you see it very vividly, for example, in the way that Trump is telling lies about immigrants, claiming that they're eating your household pets. And that's a reminder that Ronald Reagan, in his farewell address in 1989, actually talked about one of the great sources of greatness for America was our immigrants, the fact that we had so many people from so many places around the world. So that's, I think, one of the dramatic differences between then and now, and shows the evolution of the Republican Party in the wrong direction. But as you were also indicating, that you can trace some continuities. And I think one of the troubling things about Trump is this reckless disregard that he and J.D. Vance have for the truth. Because just on the migrant, pet eating thing, they've been told repeatedly, this is false. There is no basis for it whatsoever. This is made up. This is like a fourth-hand internet rumor, and they don't care. They keep on repeating these lies. Now, of course, Reagan never did anything quite that blatant, but nevertheless, in my book, I trace example after example of where Reagan said stuff that simply was not true, and it was pointed out it wasn't true, but he kept right on saying it. And he had all sorts of phony quotes, often from the John Birch Society, about how Democrats were leading America towards socialism and even communism. So I think you can kind of argue that some of Reagan's populism, some of his reckless disregard for facts, some of his catering to white backlash politics kind of inured the Republican Party and prepared it for where we are today. But there is no question that Trump is way more extreme. And, in 1981, Reaganism represented a turn to the right for the Republican Party and the country. Today, if the Republican Party were to embrace Reaganism, it would be moving to the left. It would be returning to the center. And we don't know if that's going to happen, but there may be an opportunity if Trump loses decisively in November.
Well, Ruth, part of the reason we don't know whether or not that's going to happen is because there's become almost this normalization or desensitization to fascism. And I think that Governor Walz did a really good job of getting to that underbelly in his latest speech. Take a listen.
I don't know if you noticed Nazi tyranny. We got folks running as Republicans for governor that are proud to refer themselves as Nazis. Let's not pretend that there's a gradual difference between the folks that are running here, that they're running together across this country.
I love that point about not allowing there to be a compare and contrast. Mm-hmm.
No, it's absolutely crucial because many of these people, including J.D. Vance, they're masquerading as conservatives. They use the word conservative. And, for example, Kevin Roberts of Heritage says he's a conservative. But conservatives do not, support attempts to overthrow the government. And the GOP, in my estimation, has become this autocratic party that doesn't only depend on lying, as Max said, Reagan would indulge in lying, but in corruption, because election denial is a form of corruption, and the threat and reality of violence, as we saw in January 6th, and dehumanization tactics that Reagan would not have espoused. So it's really important to distinguish between the former party and this very nakedly autocratic party that is comfortable using the language and reputation of Nazi Germany, of fascism, talking about people as vermin. This is something that goes way beyond.
It is just, I cannot believe that we are having to have this particular conversation, still having to have this particular conversation this morning. This semester, I don't know if folks know, I'm a fellow at Georgetown's Institute of Politics. And so we do a bunch of events with the students where we're talking about this presidential election. And we were doing an event just last week talking about who the Kamala Harris voters are, who the Trump voters are, what is the undecided voter really in this election. And as the students were asking questions during the Q&A, and I was sitting next to someone who was a Republican his entire life, so on and so forth. We had a good conversation. You know, Mike and I, not Michael Steele, Mike Dubuque, we had a great convo. It was great. The students were speaking and asking questions as though this was a regular election. And we were answering, frankly, as though it was a regular election. And I finally had to say in response to someone's question, I said, I think it would be wrong of me to sit here and not acknowledge the fact that this is not an election that is just about policy or, you know, we've got candidates that are putting forth good faith ideas and people are going to have to make a hard decision. Like there's one person on this ballot who is talking about demeaning, who is literally talking about taking citizenship away from people who have it. Who is literally talking the things that we see in the bowels of the internet are making its way to debate stages because the Republican candidate for president, who happens to be the former president, is saying them. And I had to tell the students this is not a normal election. And it just really feels like I don't know how we explain adequately to the young people coming up behind us, Max, about how this is not how things are and that it kind of feels like maybe we are doing them a disservice if we are not being very specific and clear that not only is this not normal, much of this feels un-American.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you see that in the fact that there are a lot of Republicans, the folks who are veterans of the Reagan administration or the Bush administration who are endorsing Kamala Harris, not necessarily because they agree with Vice President Harris on every issue, but because they recognize this is an existential question of are you going to support our democracy or not? And I think, you know, obviously a lot of the horse race journalism kind of pushes that central issue to the side and kind of normalizes Trump and makes it seem like, oh, you got a Republican nominee, you got a Democratic nominee. It's like a standard political race when clearly that is not the case. And I think it bears emphasizing. And, you know, I get very frustrated when I see certain people criticizing Vice President Harris. And you can criticize her for certain things. You can say, like, she doesn't have specific plans. She hasn't, you know, explained how she's going to do X, Y, or Z. That's all valid. But keep in mind who she's running against. And
wait, is it valid, though? Can I push you on that? Because all I've seen her do in the short time that she has been top of the ticket is roll out fairly detailed policy proposals specifically on cost, on affordability, which seems to be the issue that's top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, coming from the foreign policy space, I've seen more criticism of her for not rolling out detailed foreign policy plans. But what I'm trying to say is it's irrelevant. I mean, you have a guy who will not say that he is rooting for Ukraine to win the war. You have a guy who openly, you know, advocates for dictators around the world and threatens our own democracy at home. So it's ridiculous to hold, you know, Kamala Harris to a standard like if she was running against Mitt Romney. She's running against Donald Trump. It's a very, very different thing. And again, I think a lot of these Republican veterans, of course, led by Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney, recognize the existential stakes. But I just want to make sure that voters get it as well.
Ruth, on that point, I think it's important to note in the exchange between Alicia and Max just now that you do have this other side that people just kind of blowing by that affirms and really kind of starkly lays out the fact that this is a different kind of race, to Simone's point, where you have national security leaders from Republicans out of the Trump administration, out of former Republican administrations, supporting Kamala Harris. This election is a choice between serious leadership and vengeful impulsiveness. It is a choice between democracy and authoritarianism. Vice President Harris defends America's democratic ideals, while former President Donald Trump endangers them. That was from a letter of a group of bipartisan, more than 700. I said 700 National security leaders and former military officials endorsing the vice president. This is not a normal race. And to Max's point, while, you know, some just want to do this, oh, well, she hasn't laid out specifically how she's going to, you know, deal with this drop in the market or this increase in this price. The reality of it is you're looking past what the rest of the political establishment is telling you, that the guy she's running against should not go back to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And if you have that kind of reinforcement, what does that say to the stories that not stories, but the truths that you're trying to put out there about what authoritarianism looks like in America? Is this an example? Is this something we should be paying attention to, I would think?
Absolutely. And the reason those people are Republicans for Harris has come into being, and all the other initiatives, which are they're very interesting if you think about how rigid our two-party system is. It was always thought to be a force of stability, and people would say, oh, those other countries with multi-party systems, they're so unstable. But when one party in a two-party system has become an autocratic entity, and if it had its own independent foreign policy, it would be supporting dictators and making things easier for dictators. That's what the GOP, that's where their sympathies lie. When you have that, then having only two parties is a liability. So this Republicans for Harris, putting country over party, because that's the right thing to do right now, is extremely encouraging. Because, as you say, this is not an election that's primarily about policy, although it's life and death in terms of policy on immigration, on reproductive rights. This is a referendum about what kind of political system we're going to live in America. Will it be continuing democracy, or will it be some version of autocracy?
And that's no slouch question that Ruth has put in front of us. And I think it's an important aspect of this campaign. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, want to stick around because we got some more authoritarian business to talk about. Max Boot, thank you, my friend. Really appreciate you. Max's new book, Reagan, His Life and Legend, is available now. It's a bestseller. Grab it. It's a good read. Ahead of the weekend, New Mexico Senator Ben Ray Lujan on the Harris-Walz campaign's historic outreach to Latino voters. But first, we'll get an update on the escalating situation in the Middle East. A live report from Lebanon, straight ahead.
What the biggest companies deliver is exceptional customer experience. What makes it possible is unmatched connectivity and 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business. T-Mobile connects 100,000 Delta Airlines employees, powers Tractor Supply stores nationwide with reliable 5G business internet, and helps Red Bull revolutionize coverage of live events. This is how business goes further with T-Mobile for Business.
Everywhere but the seat. The seat is leather.
Alan, we get it. You love your bike. We do too.
That's why we're America's #1 motorcycle insurer.
But do you have to wedge it into everything?
What? I don't do that. This reminds me of my bike. The Wolf was about the size of my new motorcycle. Have you seen it, by the way? Happy birthday, Grandma!
Really?
Look how the brushstrokes follow the line on the gas tank.
Hey!
Hey! Brought my +1. Jamie.
Citi's industry-leading global payment solutions help their clients move money around the world seamlessly in over 180